I've been thinking, right? And I've been thinking about what would make, like, what makes a good MMO and like what makes classic. And I think a huge part of it is difficulty. And I know a lot of people who talk about SOD or have their ideas of what like SOD should be. A lot of people think that it should be easy, right? Like SOD should not be hard. You should be able to just jump in the raid, do it real quick, and call it a day. But personally, I do think that hard content does make the game better. And I know that the devs originally agreed with me, because if you watch, there's a 2005 interview with, I forget, I think it's Jeff Kaplan. I don't know the dude's name, but he eventually worked on Overwatch and all that. But he was been a long time WoW developer, and he was around when Classic was created. And they even said back then that hard content makes the world feel larger because it's kind of uncompleted by a lot of the player base.
We also have to give players something to aspire to. There's a lot to be said for that moment when you're sitting in Orgrimmar as a newbie and somebody runs through in like all raid gear and you're like, wow, that guy must be so powerful. Or eBay or something. Anyway, the world feels a lot bigger for everyone if there's unbeaten content out there. Even if you're the guy who's like level 30 doing a Arathi Highlands quest, but you know that the resident Uber guild of your servers, trying to kill Nefarian, it creates an epic feel for the whole world. How come there aren't any low-level raids? If you ever want to raid something at low level, you could just try something that's higher level, but there's no real point to us creating this raid content that's going to be trivialized by levels anyway.
The unique thing about this is that for each level bracket, there will be new, never-before-seen endgame content that players can participate in.
When you have content that is difficult enough that people can't do it, then it creates a type of feeling in each person like, oh dude, I see a dude with really cool gear on who did the raid, I want to do the raid too. And then it gives people something to look forward to. And he even mentions that in that interview. And what's really funny is people think that classic is easy, right? Like nowadays it is really easy because one, is a 15-year-old game and we have 15 years of knowledge of how to play this game. And on top of that, we have infinitely more resources than we did back then, because back then we didn't have WoW sims, we didn't have WoW head, we didn't have like gearing guides, rotation guides, everything you could possibly want to know about your character and how to do the raid. That shit wasn't available because it was all progression back then for a lot of servers and realms. And on top of that, like the internet was just different. There just wasn't like content creators who were pumping out information. So the game was extremely hard back then for the player base. And I think that's an important thing that people don't realize, is that the game was hard. It wasn't fucking easy. And people who say it's easy are not right, because it was difficult for the player base at the time. Like they even mentioned it in that interview as well, that killing the player is actually very easy from a developer standpoint. It's like you could just tune numbers and you could kill the player very easily just by making an attack do 1 billion damage. But that wasn't the point. They made the raids hard for the demographic at the time. So if they want to make SOD comparable and to have the same feeling as we did back in the day for raiding and for raid clearing and for gearing and raid gear and all that stuff, then they need to make the raids challenging, but for today's demographic. And I think that it's really annoying when people want the game to be dead easy, because it's kind of funny, because originally classic players had this all high and mighty feel about them where they wanted the game to be harder, and they thought that classic was actually way more difficult than retail. People would say things like, oh, in retail you get welfare epics, oh, the content's super like dumbed down and easy in retail, classic is where the difficulty's at. And that's primarily because of what I said earlier, where the game was challenging back then because players didn't have as much information. But now that we played the game, it's easy for us now because we know everything already. And it's a solved game at this point. And so I just want to say that if they want to make SOD good again, they have to make the raiding content difficult. They have to design it for today's audience. They have to design it to have punishing mechanics that require you to do it properly, otherwise you die. And mechanics like that are kind of frustrating as long as like they wipe the whole group if you hit a mechanic. So if you've ever like done mythic raiding, even heroic raiding, there's a lot of times where if one person messes up a mechanic, it kills everybody. That is one part of difficulty, but I don't like that type of mechanic personally. But there are ways to make the raid difficult without making it frustrating for the whole raid. Some mechanics where people end up dying, for example, like personally dying from messing up a mechanic, but that doesn't wipe the whole raid, is my idea like of a good difficulty. But yeah, they do need to add a bunch more mechanics that are punishing, and even mechanics which are hard but fun are also things that they need to add. And if they were able to do that properly, then I think the game would go back to what it originally was, which was a game where it was punishing, but if you did get through the raids and everything, then you would be rewarded with really cool gear, and it would make casual players want to play the game more and play the game and learn to get better gear, learn the raid, learn the rotation. That way they can achieve something, you know? And I think it's really a shame that currently the game has been made so easy because people are crying all the time for the game to be like to handhold them and ironically have welfare epics like it did back in the day. They want that now, and it's really frustrating. I just really hope that they go back to making raids hard, making the game hard, and making it fulfilling. Because really, that's what makes classic, is a feeling of danger and a feeling that, you know, you need to get better at the game if you want to achieve anything and to get the best gear. Shit, I even think leveling and questing should be harder, because I remember back in the day, I died so fucking much, dude, while questing. Now, albeit I was a young kid, like 7 or 8 or something at the time, and I was dog water, but I think they should make the game hard, even for leveling, because it's simply more fun, in my opinion. I don't like that a lot of content is so fucking easy that you barely have to use your brain, you know? I think they need to rewrite the script and make sure that they really make the game difficult again. I'm trying to think, like, what other ways can they really make the game more difficult by? Like, what can they do to make the game difficult but fun? And I think the way to do that is by having personally difficult mechanics, like I talked about earlier in raids, where, you know, you mess a mechanic up and you die. That's how they should do it personally. That guy just fucking died. Nice. But yeah, I think they really should figure out how to make the game more difficult in all content, for questing, for raiding, everything. And I know people are going to be upset about that. Like, people like really don't want the game to be hard. Like, they want the game to give them welfare epics, bro. They want the questing to be easy. They want raiding mobs and raids to fall over for them to get loot. It's like, god damn. You wonder why retail had LFR and shit and Dungeon Finder. People like you were complaining back in the day as well. The game is too hard. I can't do the raids. Like, people want everything handed to them. It's crazy to me. If you can't do it, you know, cool. Sorry. You need to get good, or, you know, just play the game casually. Don't finish the raid because you're not good enough. I just love WoW, man. But my opinions of the game are like the opposite of what other people want the game to be. Like, literally, like, people, like, everybody wants the game to be easy, and I'm like, nope, I want this shit to be fucking hard. I want leveling to be hard. I want dungeons to be hard. I want the raiding to be hard. Now, I think there should be step-ups in difficulty where, like, questing should be a step down from doing dungeons, and then dungeons should be a step down from doing raiding. And, like, the first few raid bosses should be a step down from the last bosses, right? Like, I think there should be, like, a tier of difficulty, but the game should still be hard no matter what content you're doing. Like, a little bit hard, you know, no matter what. And I think, like, what is the ideal difficulty for things like questing and dungeons? I feel like it should go back to somewhat to the days of where, you know, back in the day, people had the idea of you had to sap and polymorph, you had to kite dungeon mobs, right? I think we should somewhat go back to that time where you want to bring a mage, you want to bring a rogue, you want to bring certain classes in order to crowd control the mobs efficiently, right? I think we should go back to that for dungeons. Not entirely. I don't think the dungeon should be like a crawl to get through, like where you're just slogging through mob and mob after mob. do the dungeon, but it should be somewhat hard. Like there should be packs of mobs where you could be like, oh, there's a huge tree in there. That mob in particular, we have to kite. Like other mobs, we can just bunch up and kill in a group. But there are going to be certain areas where we have to be careful. That is what I think raiding or dungeon should be like. And you have to think, you have to crowd control, you have to slow, you have to kite, you can zap them, you can stun them. You know, that's what certain mobs should be like. And in return, they should up the gear that you get from the dungeon so that you want to do a dungeon because they're really good. They're really lucrative for getting gear. And questing, I think, should go back to a time where, doing group quests are difficult. Doing some quests in particular are very hard, but they can be hard in such a way that they're kind of easy at the same time. Like if you know how to kite certain mobs, they're really easy. If you know how to interrupt, the boss or the quest mobs won't be that hard to kill. But if it teaches you the game at the same time, right? So if the questing was kind of built around that idea of teaching the player to get used to interrupting, kiting, stunning occasionally, otherwise you die, I think that's perfect game design, because one isn't too difficult as long as you learn to, do, like I said, to interrupt. As long as you know how to do the basic part of being a player or a DPS player or whatever, the questing will be easy, right? And I think that's perfectly fine. And I think that would be perfect because it would teach a lot of casual players how to play the game, so that, when they finally hit the dungeons, when they finally get to the raids, they know to interrupt, they know to kite, they know to stun, they know how to play their class more efficiently, you know what I mean? That's what I think they should do. It'd be fun, it'd be engaging, because I'm not turning my brain off when questing or doing dungeons. Instead I'm like enjoying the moments where I can just cleave all the mobs down like I'm doing a fucking retail Mythic Plus. But then I also get to parts of the dungeon where I'm like, oh, okay, I get to play a little slow here. I get to use other parts of my kit outside of just damage, and I get to express my skill of my class, or at least the knowledge of my class, in order to make a dungeon easier. I think that's perfect. That would be so fun. It's a matter of finding that balance and difficulty between it being frustratingly difficult and being fun difficult, and I think all the changes I talked about right here would be pretty good game design, where it's both fun and engaging, and it's not too hard, it's not too easy. If you learn to play your class, if you learn to do the dungeons properly, it'll be really easy, right? I really hope that they go back to the drawing board and make the game more difficult. Sorry, I'm having to freaking take a moment here to deal with horde ganking, man. I'm just trying to hit level 50 and these horde are ruining my life. My entire fucking group fell apart because there are like 10 horde in the incursion areas ganking. But anyway, I don't want to rant too much about world PvP on a PvP realm, but these people have no life. But anyway, yeah, I think that would be the perfect way to making the game more difficult. Because you know what, playing a MOP Remix actually reminded me of why I enjoy harder content, because in MOP Remix, especially when you're lower level, shit hits you really hard. There are certain packs of mobs when you're on heroic and you're like level 20-ish in MOP Remix where you just get folded like a lawn chair, dude. It's crazy. And especially because I'm tanking as well. But it's actually really fun. The questing right now in MOP Remix is brain dead easy, kind of like retail or questing in general always has been. But at the same time, there is difficult content while you're leveling in the form of heroics, which I think is really fucking cool. Like, I love doing the heroics right now in MOP Remix. That is like the only reason I'm playing it, is because I actually have to use my brain. There are packs of mobs where I have to stun. There are packs of mobs or bosses even, where I have to kite them. And it's not too hard to kite, but it's not even that difficult. Once you know to stun, interrupt, and kite, it's really not that hard. But it just goes to show that, who is shooting me right now? There's another fucking... I'm just trying to play the game, dude. Why are there so many horde? Anyway, yeah, that is what I want in Classic, bro. I want there to be parts of a dungeon that feel like that, where... I have to kite, where I have to use my abilities, my defensive cooldowns. I have to use my stuns and my crowd control, saps, everything, just to be able to clear the dungeon. That shit's fun. That would be what makes Classic great again.